My humble respect to Guru Mahan, Guru Piran Sangran, Guru Piran Nyo, fellow Nyanis. Today I'm continuing Mahan's teachings on the second principle, which is thought. We covered the fundamentals of the thought, the thinker, the thinking process, how thoughts are generated, and so on. And we finished the first 6 parts of it, the second principle of Mahan's teachings. Today I'm going to go a little bit more, giving a little bit more illustrations on the thought and how powerful the thought is in terms of transforming our lives, from a limited to a more unlimited universal mindset. So here, let me start back again in terms of what's from this perspective of thought. This thought is the diffusion and permeation of the I. Here it refers to this spiritual, universal, substratum that is part of our DNA. And here he speaks about the big I, which is the supreme personality, or sometimes referred to in many scriptures and by many masters as this formless, dimensionless, infinite substratum that is embedded in every entity in this material universe, which is 4-dimensional. And while we are communicating through this 4-dimensional universe, where we have space and time, but part of that communication is embedded and anchored on a much more higher spiritual substratum. And we all have, at some point experienced this, either in deep sleep or in the deep meditation state. But why is it that we are unable to, experience this in our day-to-day activities? And again, here, we covered over the last few satsangs that our focus has always been external and has been conditioned to be, cognizing everything from that external universe. Hence, we think that the external universe is our reality, but external world, the material world, is limited. While it has got varieties of things, it has its own limitations. And when the mind, is anchored on that which is limited, the mind tends to take a very limited approach, perspective to life. Similarly, when our lens is red color, we see everything red. When our lens is green color, we see the world green. When our lens is universal, we see the world more universal. So here, Mahan speaks about this thought actually permeates from this infinite substratum. He calls it the I, and that permeates everything in this universe. How do we how do we cognize this? And we went through the process between the link between our intellect, our memory, our mind, the interplay between all three of them, and how for many people they seem to be disjointed, whereas one who practices meditation intensively, one who introspects, contemplates, reflects, and meditate, and undertakes deep tapas, will see that the link between the intellect, the memory, the mind, the faculties that gives us cognition and consciousness are all integrated into that one. There is no separation. And when that integration and interconnectivity takes place, we see that seamless, understanding of that. Swamiji says that Iparamum, Aparamum, the inner cosmos and the external cosmos are one. So we see that these great Mahans have shown this path, and the way they have shown is that it is not an external search, but an internal journey that they take to touch the core of existence. And through that understanding of that internal existence and the substratum, the whole material universe unravels from that universal substratum. But it requires one to understand that universal substratum in all of us. All of us are sitting on the same plane. There is no different plane that we are all sitting on. We are all sitting on the same plane. We are connected by the same plane. We are the same plane. Our bodies may be different, because the bodies go through changes. We may be displaced by space and time. And we see that, sometimes our thoughts converge, but at the spirit level, we are one. And you'll see that as one who introspects, contemplates, reflects, and meditate deeply, will feel that inner vibration, that substratum that is universal, reverberates in us as our primordial force that manifests, in this material existence as vibration or unarvu, or many, many divine vibrations that people have spoken about. So here, Swamiji then goes on a little bit more deeper, and he gives illustrations of this interconnectivity. And he gives, like many books, he talks about, suppose you have traveled all over the world, though you remain, so you've been to many places, and you remain in a particular place, and you start recollecting back all the experiences that you have had, and you see that the power of your memory, how strong your memory is, will give you how vivid that experience is, though you are sitting in a particular place. So wherever you have visited, you would feel that full presence of that world. I'll give you an example that, suppose you have traveled, to Canada, and you've been in the winter, you've experienced winter, you smell the pine, you smell the trees, you smell the snow and the experience, and you come back, to Malaysia, and on a, warm tropical night, you close your eyes and you reflect back that winter stormy, moment in Canada, where you are on the snow, playing with the snow, building the snowman, getting the smell, and you see that though you've displaced by time and space, you see that memory is been embedded into the core of our being, and you get that full vivid experience of that moment in time and space, that you are transcend that space and time continuum. When you transcend that space and time continuum, you see that your presence become omnipresent. You become one. The whole space and time just collapses or converges in you, and it unravels from you. So there's a fusion that takes place, and in that fusion, you experience multiplicity. So we see that, think about all the places that you have visited, right? But what you really need to do is that when you visit a particular place, make sure you're fully observant. Make sure you're fully introspective, contemplative, reflective, and meditative, so that that thought and that experience is very deep, that it is then, transferred from your short-term memory to your long-term memory, and it becomes part of your DNA. Oftentimes, people, when they travel, they become tourists. Tourists means picking this, picking that, but they're not fully immersed in that experience. The thing that you can take back is not your mementos and things like that, but the most important thing that you take in any travel is the experience. And if you focus with a very deep, expansive mind, with focus, precision, with, as I said, that the introspectiveness, like how electron microscope, that experience becomes so rich and so deepened that it becomes core to your being. You'll never forget it, you see. So, and if we did this, not just the snow in Canada or the pine trees or, the Niagara Falls, but in every moment, if we did that, every moment of our life, we have that deep introspective, contemplative, reflective, and meditative experience, it becomes core to our being. And at any moment, we see that when we are in that present state, that present becomes a present, a gift. So we see that this is the power of the human mind. And this is why this meditation is critical. It helps you to focus, it helps you to sift out, it helps you to look at the thoughts very, very carefully with precision, and deepen each of the thoughts that is enriching and enlightening and elevating, and incorporate that as part of your DNA. That experience that is very short and uh, that are not relevant is integrated, assimilated, and becomes one with one's experience, with the coating of one's divinity. So we see this. Swamiji says that the deepening of the thought is very important. The deepening of the thought happens if we understand the thought creation process, and how we understand, go to the core of how the thought is generated, why the thought is there, and have that full awareness. We see that we become enlightened by this experience. So Swamiji here gives an illustration how, of course, he has traveled many places across the globe in his lifetime, and he captures this. He incorporates all his travels as part of his journey of this meditation. So we are all travelers. We are this infinite divine being that is experiencing this limited material existence. So we are unlimited, formless, divine beings that are experiencing this formed, limited experiences. That in itself is an enlightening experience. So we see this traveler, I like this term called explorer, right? The notion of exploring new frontiers and becoming enlightened by it. Another example he gives is that how, so earlier was, the travels, the things that we do, and how we deepen it. The next one is that when we think of musicians, seers, yogis, philosophers, and we are so deeply focused on a particular music, or an author of a book. We see that we become immersed with that melody. We become immersed with that story that is being unraveled by the author. Or similarly, a philosophy of a seer or yogi or philosophers. When our mind is so 100%, into and trying to unravel this knowledge, we see that we become one with this knowledge. I'll give you some examples. I'm a Sherlock Holmes fan, and when I was young, I used to read a lot of Sherlock Holmes, books. And sometimes you get so immersed in that mystery and so immersed in it that you feel that you are like Sherlock Holmes, trying to unravel the secrets of the mystery, right? In that same way, everything seems so mystical, and there's a lot of mystery of life. And if become like the seers or the yogis or the philosophers that are unraveling, trying to unravel this, you see that you become more and more intensive, you become more and more interested, and eventually you see that you start exploring new frontiers of knowledge. And eventually you see that your mindset becomes like them, whether a musician or a seer or a yogi or a philosopher or a scientist, your mind slowly becomes like them. As what, the saying that if you start thinking about, things, you become them. So this is something that we see that, this is called the intellectual or the spiritual osmosis. When we are associated with people of, a particular mindset, when we mix with them, when we, discuss with them, when we associate with them, slowly, slowly through this process of osmosis, our thoughts, our speech, what we hear, the way we hear things, the way we see things, the way we cognize things, slowly, slowly becomes like, the people that we think about a lot. And ultimately, we become them. So this is one perspective that Swamiji speaks about. So the thoughts that we generate, the thoughts that we create are to some extent, impacted by the orbit that we are in. So similarly, if we are associating, if we are reading about great masters, great saints, great philosophers, great scientists, or including great, universal thought, about God and divinity. And, slowly you start seeing that the mind starts reverberating and vibrating in that same frequency. Your mind eventually becomes connected to that higher order substratum. Ultimately, you see that you become that. Whatever existence you are in, whatever frequency you are in, it's resonating with that universal frequency. So we see this, among great saints and sages. When I was young, I wanted to be a scientist, and I used to have Albert Einstein's, photo on my in my study area. It used to say that, the quote is that imagination is more important than knowledge. What it means is that your mind should be exploring new frontiers. Knowledge you can learn, but that exploring mindset is very important. Exploring new frontiers, discovering new knowledge. And over the years, of thinking about it in that way, slowly, I saw myself gravitating to become a scientist. So in the same way, philosophy or, music, what we think, we become that. But if we associate with people who have very limited, understanding of things, or very negative, we see that even that starts reverberating in us. So be very watchful of, the thoughts we cultivate, the kind of things that we expose ourselves, and ensure that we are always, learning new things. And also I think, as we become more and more universal, you see that you're able to withstand things that are challenging, but you're able to then, through your own power of your mind, transform what is limited, circumstances to becoming more and more universal. So you become that transforming agent. Uh, and this is what we see, that the thought is so important. Again, Swamiji gives a lot of examples in the book, when we eat food of different tastes and experience all the 6 kinds of taste, you are one with the various materials by which food is composed. I'll give you a simple example. If you're a connoisseur of food, you would know the subtle taste of food. And when you prepare the food, and when you are in the full introspective, contemplative, reflective, and even meditative state as you are eating your food, you can actually feel every subtle spices and taste and experience. They'll be able to tell you the texture, when the spices kick in, when cinnamon comes in, when the cardamom comes in. And because the mind is so refined to be able to get that information from all the sensory perceptions collectively and individually, to see how they collectively come to give you a symphony of taste, somewhat like an orchestrator. The orchestra, you hear beautiful melody, but the orchestra, the orchestrator, will be able to know, okay, this is when the violin should come in, and this is when the flute should come in, and this is how individually they come in to give you that burst of flavors, or the burst of beautiful music. In combination, it gives you that oneness. So you get that oneness in that multiplicity. And this is what the mind starts looking at, while you are able to appreciate that symphony of experience, but you're able to also experience how each one of them combines to this experience. This is really important, because while I've given you the food experience, in our lives, we have many experiences. Some are challenging and some are beautiful. And the beautiful ones, sometimes we don't know why we're getting that. And a sharp mind, an introspective mind, will be able to piece where all these are coming from and how these are creating that symphony of experiences. And if that symphony changes from a beautiful to something different, you'll be able to then modulate and moderate it to be able to get back to the universal, symphony. This is why the spiritual compass is so important. So we see that the oneness. Similarly, when there are challenging experiences, that one goes through, one would be able to say, okay, this is an experience, a tone that is very different from the earlier one. What are the things that I need to do to modulate and moderate to become more and more universal? So we see that the focus of that human mind becomes very critical. And this is where the how thoughts emerge, the type of thoughts that emerge, and the thought could be a combination of experience, but yet, they're coming from different sources that are piecing together to give you that experience. So a mind that is attentive, a mind that is focused, will be able to understand this collection of symphonies, but also this individual information that is coming through. So Swamiji captures here that how that the experience that we get, it generates the thoughts, and the thoughts are stored in us. But so if we are not subtle, and if we don't pick up the subtleties on where this comes from, we see that the memory is unable to store that information. So next time when something comes, you're unable to connect. But if the mind is able to capture those subtle thoughts and that collection of thoughts, and that experiences, the mind is able to recognize future similar experiences or even generate those future experiences. This is the power of the human mind. So, so somebody then talks about this whole how the mind operates, and he then talks about the different types of people, the different types of through these experiences, the different types of personalities that emerge. At some point, all of us have gone through this experiences, and he speaks about the thought of a devotee. And we saw this, discussion when we did the Dvaitva, the duality, where God and the devotee is seen as separate. But the recognition is that, God in its universal, personality is the creator of the universe, creator of, the material universe, and all of us. And a devotee would say that God is everywhere. So our goal in life is to seek God, to attain the grace of God, to be one with God. And this is how the human mind starts off with the evolution. So the thought is about I and God and the universe. And we are separate entities, but all of it emerged from God itself. I don't, I as a limited being are unable to comprehend this, but I know, that God is much more far greater than me. Hence, my goal as a devotee is to expand my mind, acquire the wisdom, knowledge, to be able to expand the set of my experiences and thoughts, so that my thoughts that is limited through this wisdom knowledge becomes more and more inspired, more and more noble, more and more expanded. Ultimately, the limited thought and frequency expands to be able to understand God and seek God and see God in everything that I experience. So this is what a devotee would do. They would see God, as the most supreme being, and everything is the will of God. And my goal is to attain the grace of God. So this is one, perspective of, a person, a devotee. The second one is, when one, uh, you know, goes through the stage of, devotee, of having the bhakti. Through bhakti, one attains that, spiritual experience, more focused experience. One acquire knowledge of God and nature and the things around us. That leads to greater bhakti, and that bhakti leads to greater wisdom, knowledge. Ultimately, we see that we start exploring ourselves. And this is the next stage of evolution, that one becomes more and more a yogic kind of thought of a yogi. What is a yogi? One who practices yoga. Yoga is what? The practice of union. The practice of union with what? With the universal divine nature. And we see that yogis, realize that God in its universal formless form in this material universe, manifests as vibration, manifests as resonation, manifests as rhythm, manifests as the geetam, or the vibration. And it is all these different names are seen as what we call the Kundalini power, Kundalini Shakti. Kundam is actually the vessel, Lini is actually the power that emanates, generates, sustains, and dissolves everything in this material universe. And it's a manifestation of that primordial universal personality. So God, for a yogi who is in that union state, earlier the devotee sees God and himself as separate. Through the process of evolution, spiritual evolution and maturity, there's a unification that starts taking place. The devotee starts seeing, a devotee becomes a yogi, where it says, if God is everywhere, if God is infinite, then God must be reverberating in me. And God is reverberating in me, it must be reverberating in me as my life force, which is my Kundalini. And this is where, and the whole goal of my life is to awaken this inner power in me, enable this inner power in me to awaken my mind, enrich all my nerves and all my neural connectivity and all my thinking capacity and power, and to be able to unlock the secrets of nature that is embedded in me, in this biology within me. And a goal of a yogi is to use that Kundalini to awaken this. Awaken here is to, being in the state of slumber or ignorance of this greater vibration, is to give one that capacity and the capability to awaken oneself, to be aware of this inner power, that vibration of the Bhagavan's Geetam that is emanating in all of us. So a yogi would be able to expand their neural connectivity, so such that they're able to pick up some of the subtle vibrations that an ordinary human mind would not be able to capture. That subtle vibration that is so quiet, in the quietude, the truth is revealed to them. So a yogi would, take this path of awakening this Kundalini within oneself. The mind slowly gravitates from that material gravity. The pull of material gravity slowly weakens, and the pull of that inner cosmos becomes more and more stronger, and the awakening starts taking place. So this is another stage of a thought of a yogi. And ultimately, as that focus takes place, the thought of a self-realized person is that all this, this experience ultimately starts with understanding what the true self is. And here Swamiji speaks about when you realize your true self through the help of a guru who has attained self-realization, one who has experienced this, one who's able to show this experience, not theoretically, by reading books, but to be able to show how one acquires this knowledge of the self. Here, self means that, SELF, the silence, that spirit in us that is reverberating in that subtle silence, in that subtle silence, that spirit is expanded. The second door is expansion. There's no more limitedness. There's no more sitting, trying to break out of the box. You are that expansion, formless, dimensionless, and in that state, the third door, L, is actually the liberation. You are not in any prison. While the body is limited, the mind that is, inoculated by this self is unlimited. And finally, the F is finality. I am that. So a guru who has attained this is able to show this, how through the various practices. And when one attains this, one will realize that the thought now expands from I and God are separate, or God manifests as my Kundalini. Ultimately, I am omnipresent. In that subtle state, one attains this blissful universal thought. And this is an evolution that we go through. All of us great saints have gone through this. They start off with this bhakti, the discipline, the selfness through this practice of Kundalini meditation, and ultimately the attainment of the self-realized state. They realize that I am that one universal. The thought becomes more and more universal. And you see that when the lens becomes more universal, I'm omnipresent. The mind starts, doing a few what I call thought experiments. Think about this way: if God is infinite, is there a place God is not? And if there's a place that God is not, then it cannot be an infinite God. And if God is infinite, then uh, God must be everywhere. And where is the distance between me, the mind, and God? And the mind starts, hey, the closest distance is in me. So if I am part of this creation, then the creator must be part of me. And this is the self-realization process. And eventually the mind starts galvanizing to that universal, say, hey, that I am part. So eventually when the mind becomes that form of universality, you see that all your senses become more and more subtle. It's able to pick up things that you would not have picked up before. And ultimately you see that you become one with everything. So your thoughts, your speech, your actions, everything becomes an omnipresent state, that you are continuously connected. And this is what Swamiji refers to as Swamiji's meditation. Meditation is Swamiji. You see? So when one attains that omnipresent state, you are not disconnected from God. You're not disconnected from this universal reality. You are always one. Though you are in this material world, you are still connected. Though, the difference between one who's connected and one is not connected, one who is not connected thinks that they have to do this. One who's connected realizes that they are a channel of doing things. The flow becomes a much more higher dimensional flow. While you're still partaking in this material world, you see that you're fully connected and the mind is so awakened, and the mind is so aware that whatever you do becomes 100%, full attention, and the full force of one's inner resource is channeled towards that, and you get the full experience of whatever you do, from eating to listening to experiencing everything with that oneness. And you see that that experience becomes mighty rich and enriched and enlightened. And this is what this thought about, Swamiji talks about second principle, that the thought that is limited, when we become more and more aware of it, the thought generating process becomes clearer. We see that we're able to create, the lens that generates that universal thought and experiences. So this is Swamiji's teachings on this. Sandosham.